Hey, you are listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
I'm your co-host Josh, and we are kicking off our Monster Mosh for Mental Health series this month in October and September. And we are joined by the very band that is going to be kicking us off. Mr. Kalen, he is the drummer from Artusia. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm excited to jump into because I want to hear a little bit more about the story. You teased a little bit about like before. We're gonna hear it in this episode about the evolution of the band. Um, but can you kind of tell, like, open up and kind of talk about the sound and kind of the journey of finding the sound of Artusia?
All right. So it's kind of been a long story in the last few years. We've kind of had some changes over time. We've tried some different things. When we initially started out, it was David, myself, and Brian, our bass player. So David and I are actually related. We're cousins. What's funny with that is, most interviews we've done, it started with this one interview and someone actually called us brothers. And we kind of ran with that ever since. So that's what we tell people. I mean, we do look alike too, to be fair. And Brian, the bass player, he actually grew up with us as well. So David and I, we've been playing music together since we were kids. So long story short with that, David actually was playing drums first, and I was playing guitar, and we learned together. And then down the road, we just kind of switched somehow. When we got around like 12 or 13, we just ended up switching. And Brian, he's kind of been there since that same time frame as well. He's played in different bands, like grunge bands and kind of like, I wouldn't say pop punk bands, but close. And he's been around Richmond for a long time, and we just kind of ended up linking up. I think it was 2019 is when we really formed like the trio and really started to get out there and doing stuff. Um, is there any like in-depth questions, I guess, like in particular you want to know?
Yeah, can you kind of talk about describe the sound of Artusia? Like listeners are gonna get able to hear a little bit, but just kind of general like how would you describe the sound of Artusia, like influences, stuff like that?
Okay. It's also an interesting question. It's when I talk to people on a daily basis and they ask like what we sound like, it's hard for me to really just say we're like a metal band or a rock band or something like that. So we started to kind of run with the term like groove metal. Our sound, I would say it's a very raw sound. We don't really do a lot when it comes to like post production and mix downs and mastering and things like that. It's like we like the sound to be unique, but also just kind of pure for what it is, I guess you could say. So when I kind of relate ourselves to anything, I kind of lately have been saying like Lamb of God and Gojira, we kind of found a place in the middle of that is where we've started to write as in like the last year or so. So it's a good balance. It's kind of heavy, but also has this kind of ambient, just interesting thing to it. Like the riffs that David tends to write, they're pretty abstract sometimes. So it takes me a bit to even catch on drumming because I'm like, well, I want to be on that same level and come up with something interesting, like a fill or whatever it might be. So I try to meet him in that same place.
So the new single is called It's Okay. You guys are gonna get to hear it at the end of this episode. But one of the things that like when I heard it, because we're recording this before it's been released, is that it's really hard to kind of like put into words because you could definitely tell that there's like so many like musical influences. Like to me it I definitely feel like the production like reminds me of like 1980s like funk music that you would catch at like CBGBs, but then it has like
Mm-hmm.
this quality about it that is a kind of like hardcore from like the late 90s, early 2000s, but yet it blends in some of those punk elements as well. I'm kind of curious, like mixing all of these like different genres, what is the writing process like for you guys as a band? Because it's been a while since I've actually heard anything quite like Artusia.
Yeah, so I would say you definitely nailed it. That kind of goes to what I was saying, just with our sound and what we kind of go for in recording. As for the influences, I think a lot of the punk side of things definitely comes from Brian's end. He's like a big Motorhead fan. A lot of punk bands in particular that he listens to. He's a big Gigi Allen fan, by the way. He loves Gigi Allen. So, um, so when it comes to writing, it a lot of times it's like a riff. You know, David might have him and I. Obviously, we spend a lot of time together, just jamming and stuff, even outside of band practice. So he'll kind of have a riff, something he's doodling around on, and I'll just kind of start playing. You know, and we kind of go from there. I play guitar as well, so there's some parts that I might feel like, you know, maybe we could try this, and I'll pick up a guitar and play a riff and come up with something or something like that. The song Inquisition in particular, actually, Brian wrote that entire song, like the riff, everything, you know, and he's the bass player. But you know, he's also a guitar player as well. That was his main thing that he did forever in all the punk bands and things like that. So I guess there's really no certain lane, like one person does most of the writing and we all just kind of fall around it. Everyone really has their part in writing every song or an idea. If somebody's got an idea and writes a whole song, awesome. You know, everybody's included, that's for sure.
One of the things that I grew up playing in bands, I don't know if Mark did or not, but like I definitely grew up like if did you?
I tried. I just never could get anything going with anyone. I had friends
It's
that played in
it's
bands,
tough.
but I never could get it going.
It's is real tough, but like one of the things that I've noticed like growing up now with the age of streaming and Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, etc., like it seems to be like the go-to thing is like the new model is that everyone like releases singles instead of like dropping 12 songs every few years. Can now that there's that landscape has been kind of open for musicians, do you guys feel the pressure to like perfect each song that you guys are getting ready to release? Like, you know, it's okay. Like we talked about this before we started recording, but you talked about like the gradual like progression from like Inquisition to like it's okay.
So yeah, I guess the singles and albums thing, that's definitely something we've talked about a lot recently. And the singles, that's basically what we've decided to do as well, at least for the time being. I'm not really sure what the time frame is going to be on that. We have another single that's pretty much ready to release after It's Okay, but I guess we're just trying to decide like how much time do we want to have in between. You know, nowadays you see bands dropping songs like every 2 weeks or every 30 days, and that's a good model to have. If you can put out content like that, that's awesome because it keeps you relevant, it keeps you in that cycle. You know, you've always got something happening, your name is always apparent, you know. Because when you put out an album, I guess it's you drop all you have and then you just kind of disappear in a sense. You know, you have the people that are listening to that album every day for the next year or two until the next one comes out. But I feel like just how everything is now, it's kind of like social media. You know, you put something out, you're relevant for a couple days, and then nobody knows you exist anymore. And it's like music is kind of falling into that, I feel like. So when you're putting out singles, you're keeping yourself relevant, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate where we the music scene has kind of gone. That's part of the reason I like kind of discovering like smaller bands and bands that, you know, maybe don't have the biggest following. But we my wife and I actually went to a local show not that long ago in Richmond and caught a band that had recorded an entire full length, and their plan for marketing it was instead of actually releasing it as a full length, releasing one single a month for a year, and then releasing the full length as a whole after that year had been up. And I just never heard of that. I just thought that was like a really interesting approach to music production.
Well, I
Mm-hmm.
think I think who's it? Offspring has released a couple singles over the last couple of years, but still hasn't put out a new CD. And there's been a handful of bands that are doing that. they're putting out a new single here and there, and whenever they put out the album, they put out the album.
Well, I think
Yeah.
it's like, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's kind of the thing a lot of people do. They'll put out 3, 4, or 5 songs, and then like 6 months later, you'll get those last 2 in the whole album or something like that. Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah, and I think like as someone that really loves media, I would much rather have a band kind of take their time with making art and like releasing a single like every 3 or 4 months versus like yeah an album that's like half-hearted because not to take a page out of Mark's book, but kids these days don't know how good they have it with streaming because you'll never pick up a CD and like spend your hard-earned cash on it only to be disappointed that only like 3 songs on the entire album were good.
Yeah, I have a hard time just downloading one song in this newfangled digital age. I still get the whole album. It's habit at this point.
Fair. I mean, if I'm gonna get an album, like at this point, it's gonna be vinyl. So,
What did I get? The last one I got was Mental Cruelty's new album that came out a month or 2 ago.
Nice.
It's like blackened deathcore is how it's described. Blackened symphonic deathcore.
Nice. Well, speaking of music, not quite blackcore, we're getting ready to hear the single Inquisition from Artusia. Kayla, is there anything else you want to tell us about the song before we take a break here?
I guess mainly this was our first official release we put out. And Metal Injection actually picked this song up, which is cool.
That's awesome.
So yeah, they actually released our video and stuff. So pretty memorable. It's a cool thing to look back on when I think of this song. So
well, without further ado, this song is called Inquisition, and this is Artusia. Be right back. a welcome back to Abyss Gazing. That is once again, that was Artusia. Song is called Inquisition. You guys can catch Artusia live at our benefit show, Monster Moth for Mental Health on October 7th. Doors open at 7. Artusia takes the stage at 7:30 at another round bar and grill. We'll provide links in the show notes below. But we have gone to each of the bands on the bill. They're going to be joining us for the next 5 weeks for this series called Monster Mosh for Mental Health. And Kaylin has brought us 2022's Smile. Yeah. I'm like, I'm genuinely curious to have this conversation because I thought this movie was vastly overhyped last year when it was released. I did not like this movie, and I think this viewing for this podcast really redeemed this movie in my eyes. I've watched the short film along with it, so I've come prepared. But Caleb, out of curiosity, like why this movie?
So when you had first approached us about, this interview and picking a movie, I was kind of fumbling through different ideas, movies, and something that would be kind of relevant to the conversation. I even thought about bringing like Midsummer here. And I was like, no, I mean, it's a cool movie, but I was like, I don't know, it's that's a whole different thing,
Very true.
It's a whole different.
If you ever get the opportunity to see the director's cut of Midsummer, yeah, it's worth it.
One of these days I'll buy it.
Yeah, that's actually the one that I watched the last time I watched it. And it's really good. It's a great movie, but I kind of felt like Smile was maybe a little more intuitive to the conversation, I guess, and the topic at hand. So it's a good movie. A friend of mine actually recommended it to me not too long ago, and I watched it and I really enjoyed it. It's an interesting movie.
All right,
So
Mark.
it was the second time I had seen it.
Same.
And I had heard all the hype. I know you said you had it recommended to you, and Josh kind of said about the same thing. I thought about it. It reminded me a lot of the stereotypical "is she crazy, is she not crazy" movies.
Well, like just opening up that can of worms and just diving right into it. One of the things that like I'm really appreciative that like Caitlin recommended this movie because I think when you talk about terms of horror and mental health, this whether you've liked the film or not, thematically, I think it speaks volumes to what we do in the conversations we have here at Abyss Gazing. And I think like the whole concept of like, is she crazy? Is she not crazy? Like having that subject matter as like a viewer, I think that's largely how we as a civilization approach the subject of mental health. Like you can't necessarily quote unquote believe someone unless you see something. And or if they're talking in the way that she ends up talking throughout the movie, then like the only logical conclusion is that this chick must be crazy. And it's I think it's more complex than that is because there's a world of trauma that our protagonist has in this movie that um I am want to make sure I get the name right. Um oh, hey, come on. Rose has in this. And I think it does. I think it speaks this movie speaks volumes to the impact of generational trauma, like unresolved trauma, and also like how we as the outside world like view that person and the relationship to trauma.
Yeah, it doesn't do a bad job of what they're trying to present. It's just, to me, it's just a kind of generic in the way it did it.
All right.
Because you've seen that same story. That was the story behind Evil Dead, and Mia and her brother was the same story as this one.
It is, but
Eh,
I want to challenge you for this conversation to step back from your like feelings on a movie and like necessarily like not necessarily how you view the movie, but like what the movie is like trying to say and its themes. Because I agree with you. I think this movie is it's generic. I think I think it works better as a short film. Laura Hasn't Slept is a solid short film, but as a movie, this movie just kind of feels like a little bit too elongated, I think, for the story it's trying to tell. But yeah.
yeah, it's a case of you don't know what people are dealing with, and even what you do see may not be everything. And that's kind of what that's kind of the way it's telling the story, because nobody really believes her except the people that the like one or two people that had actually dealt with it.
Very true. Well, I think it's mainly why I picked this movie. It's really because of that. I think we as people, we've all been through things and have had different experiences, and not everyone understands, the things that you're dealing with, even on a daily basis. But you don't really have to understand someone to be supportive, and you're not going to get that from everyone that you communicate with. But you do have the close people in your life that will essentially like go to the depths of hell with you to support you, and that's kind of how that movie unfolded. When you have, the one of the main characters that played that role, he pretty much believed her. And, you know, I don't really want to say too much to spoil the movie, but I guess you know where I'm getting at with that. So,
Yeah, and on that note, this is your official spoiler warning because I feel like you can't have this cohesive conversation without throwing that in there. This movie's way too new. It's not even a year old yet. So if you guys haven't checked it out, go hit pause, go check out Artusia on Spotify and Apple Music, and then go sign up for Paramount Plus and watch this movie. Um, yeah, so this is your official spoiler warning for Smile, but yeah, I think it's one of those things too. It's like it also demonstrates how easily it is or like that trauma passes down from generation to generation and eh, that this whole like entity demon whatever you want to call the smiling creature that ends up being revealed in the end is it's this thing that like it passes and like there's a point in the movie where they're describing that it basically feeds on trauma. It feeds and it lives, and that's like how it acquires its power. And I think honestly, like that speaks volumes to how easily it is to have trauma pass from one generation to another, and especially if there you have one generation that is saying that, we don't talk about mental health, we don't talk about our feelings, you bottle it up. If you're passing that on, you are basically elongating that trauma and its impact.
Well, it also had a kind of an underlying theme of things can also be genetic.
Yeah.
They kind of talk about the mother that was the cause of all the trauma to begin with and her issues, and the sister makes the comment, it's this is just how mom was, you're acting like mom was. And it goes back that a lot of conditions can actually be genetic in nature.
Yeah, so give me 1 second. I am somebody else take the wheel real quick. I'm like trying to find something right now.
Did they ever really make clear what the mother's condition was, or was she?
I think I think she just had depression. I mean, I don't think it needs to be for as big as this movie and as fantastical as it can get at times, I don't think there needs to be like any reason that it need like the mother's disease needs to be like anything like, you know, larger than life. I think it can be something as simple as you know, just something as literally as simple as depression.
I asked because of the way the sister made such a big deal about it on the porch, talking about you're acting just like mom did. It to me indicates that she may have had some sort of condition that consisted of hallucinations and things like that.
Yeah. So I want to go back to your point about being hereditary, because I have the thing that pulled up now. So there's a study that was done last year by the 74million.org where they interviewed they interviewed four different generations. They interviewed the Gen Z aged 15 to 25, millennials 26 to 41, Gen X 42 to 57, and then boomer slash the silent generation is 58 and above. What they found was feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge. 61% of Gen X acknowledged that, whereas 28% percent of boomers did, 40% of Gen X, and millennials 53%. Feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, 42% of Gen Z. Millennials said 28%, 29% of Gen X, and 18% of the silent generation. Thoughts that you would be better off dead, or thoughts of hurting yourself in any way, so suicide or self-harm. 18% of Gen X acknowledged, 10% of millennials, 6% of Gen X, and 2% of boomers. And what I think is fascinating about these results is that statistically speaking, the demographic that is actually has the highest suicide rate and has had the highest suicide rate for I want to say at least the last decade, is always men aged 55 to 70, I think is what it is. But it's crazy to me that like to see like statistics like these, but you're gotta getting to see that like there's more and more of the younger generation that are being like anxious, depressed, suicidal as well.
Does it talk about you giving that age range? Does it go into detail of how many of them may have been veterans,
This
maybe police, or gone through a divorce with
this
kids?
one this does not. So according to a quote from this article, for people ages 10 to 23, suicide rates have increased from 60% to almost 60% from 2007 to 2019, according to the CDC. Emergency room visits for suspected suicide attempts among adolescents rose 31% from 2019 to 2020. The CDC also reported, but it doesn't like at all like this. Just kind of glancing at this, like there's no like detailed like statistics about like what plays into those roles, whether that is like, hereditary, genetics, um, trauma, environments, wealth, race, career. Like it doesn't kind of go into anything, just ages.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in this show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
I was just curious.
How dare you be curious? All right. So something on like a little bit of a lighter note, I am curious about two things. So this movie, the way that it works, do they ever actually say that like is there like a time frame of when like you have this like interaction with the quote unquote like infected person, and then as it passes it on, is there like a time frame that they lay out of like how often it jumps from person to person?
They said so the person has to witness the suicide or murder,
Mm-hmm.
and cop, I'm assuming ex-boyfriend, stated the shortest he had seen was 4 days until the witness had killed themselves, and the longest he had seen was about a week.
Okay. So running with the latter
And
sounds
when he said that, she said she was at 4 days.
okay. So let's just say 7 days. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it?
The Ring.
The Ring. Boom. Also, I know you've seen it, Mark, but Kaylin, have you seen Barbarian yet?
I have not.
Okay. All right, Mark, I'll text you after we get done recording, because I feel like there's like a slight correlation between those two movies. Um,
But Barbarian and The Ring.
no, Barbarian and Smile.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I might have to look it up after this then. Watch it.
Yeah, Barbarian's decent.
I highly recommend Barbarian. It's a great movie. Don't undersell that movie. The movie is fantastic. But Smile, yeah. This movie, I feel like it's just is like honestly kind of riddled. One of the things that in terms of like the strengths of this film is that this has one of the strongest openings I feel like I've seen in horror in recent memory. Where you have the girl that has basically that the smile demon has attached itself to, kind of confessing to Rose. And go ahead.
So the girl that plays that part, I don't know what her name is.
Well, she's all over the marketing campaign for this too.
Yeah, I thought she was the main character, going to be when I first saw it, but she is actually in another horror movie, a smaller budget one that's on Tubi, and she's a main character, and I believe it's called Fear Inc. And it's actually really fun and really good.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Just side note, yeah, check that out.
we're just like Halen just came on here and he's just like leaving with a list of horror movies to check out.
I know. I'm typing it in actually.
I believe it's called Fear Inc. was the name of it, and it's got Smalls from The Sandlot in it in a minor role. That actor's in it, or not Smalls. The redhead. I forgot what his character's name was in The Sandlot, but he's in it. He's got a small role. But yeah, she was one of the main characters in it. All
It
right.
is indeed
Okay.
called Fear Inc.
Yeah,
I just looked it up.
it's worth checking
Um,
out. It's a fun movie. Okay, you may proceed.
but I think like even like it's that side note aside, like I think that is like even such a beautiful representation. Like I feel like you see it later with Rose and her counselor or therapist, where instead of like actually listening and hearing the issues of the patient, they are just kind of quick to write it off. And I feel like I've voiced this several times, but like the the mental health system here in America is it's kind of a joke. And I feel really bad to say that because like, you know, I've just recently started therapy and like a couple months ago, and like when I set up my first appointment, it was like mid May, and I couldn't get in for I think it was like 3 weeks, but like I didn't have any pressing issues, but I imagine like what would happen if like I was someone that was, on the verge of like suicide and like I couldn't wait till tomorrow. And some of it I think is like being understaffed in certain parts, but like some of it I think is just like we at least from like the conversations that I've had from people in the mental health industry, it seems like we're really quick to just kind of write things off. Um and just kind of medicate the problem versus actually addressing it.
Yeah, and that's to me, that's kind of the problem with the medical field in general, is throw drugs at it. And if you have side effects, throw more drugs at it.
Yeah, because we see that with Rose in this movie too, where like she is somebody that, is starting to see these demonic hallucinations and
And
her
they're throwing pills at her like Tic Tacs.
yeah, she's like, we just need to up your medication. It's like it's literally not that simple. Sometimes it is, and like sometimes it's not.
I think there was one scene when she met with like I guess it was her main therapist that she used to go to in the past. And when she first met with her, she was actually trying to get a prescription, and the therapist told her no and wanted her to kind of just give it more time and maybe understand and process what's happening first. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That was an interesting twist. Because in most
I'm
cases,
really
like what you guys are saying, that's typically what happens. They just kind of throw whatever at you and here, just take this.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up that scene because that's a great juxtaposition to the like how I believe proper like how proper therapy should be, or like steps towards like overcoming something is trying to find a way to actually like overcome it, not necessarily, you know, and just kind of placing a band-aid on it. Because I think what medication does, I think medication has its place, but I think oftentimes the wounds that we're trying to escape, instead of embracing them, we decide to kind of just put like a band-aid over it. That I'm not saying that that is for every single individual, but I think that's oftentimes the way that it seems like we approach it. I've had many people that have gone into therapy, and that's just been unfortunately their experience.
Yeah, I mean, at one point, many years ago, I tried to go, and all they wanted to do was throw drugs at me, and the drugs made me feel like almost like a zombie. Um, and when I told them I wanted off of it, no, you can't, you're going to lose your job, you're going to lose all your friends, and just wanted to tell me I was going to lose everything if I quit taking drugs. And here's prescriptions for more drugs, is all they would do. And that's my biggest issue. Yeah, some people need it. Don't get me wrong. Some people need the help. But not everything needs to have the drugs. And when somebody's expressing that, hey, I don't like this isn't helping, they kind of want to do it anyways. You get what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
that
Different
yeah.
solutions for different people, you know.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we've talked about several times on the show is that what one approach to therapy, might work for one person doesn't necessarily work for the other person. Um, you know, like typically like my form of like calming down or therapy is like watching a dumb movie, just watching something really stupid. And but I also have like friends that do music much like you, Kaylin, and so like music has been like a huge therapy point for them as well. It's been a very healthy expression of what they're feeling, and it's become a safe environment for them to express themselves. And I have other people that like do like painting and sculptures, and one of those things is it proves that like not what works for one person is not necessarily going to work for somebody else.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, people's outlets aren't the same, and things that work for one don't have may just frustrate others more. So
Yeah, and that's one of the things that like, you know, I've I've heard a lot of stories like going back to like your medication experience and your therapy. Like I've had a lot of friends that have like very similar stories to that. And when I got into therapy, that was one thing that I was like, I have a family, I have family that have histories with drugs, and I already know that like there are certain things that I do that like are border addictive, tendencies, and like I don't want to, you know, have that option of being gateway. Like I'd rather put salt in the wound and like work through it. Um, and sometimes that's not the case for everyone, but I think it goes back to this common theme where we keep saying is that what works for someone is not necessarily going to work for the other person.
one of the interesting things when you start getting into the numbers, like you were talking earlier, is it's the numbers almost skew towards women getting treatment and therapy in significantly higher percentages than men, but you also see the higher death rates in men due to depression and suicide and things like that.
That is a really fascinating thing to bring up because I am almost curious if some of that is generational stuff we've talked about. Like men have this societal expectation that you don't talk about your feelings, you're not vulnerable, bottle it up and move on. Like God forbid you show any sign of humanity. And two, I think that, because
And
women
I
go
think
ahead.
that interpretation is a touch off. It's not so much show any sign of humanity. It's God forbid you show any sign of weakness. There is a
That's fair.
difference.
That's fair. But like, women, I think it women could be because like, in again, the societal expectations are that like women are nurturers, women are a source of peace, a source of love, a source of joy. And so like if that image of a woman is anything but that societal expectation, then we kind of have to essentially like reset them or, figure out a way to make that woman either whole or just a number of anything that would could happen. to be against that. I don't know.
It's just one of those interesting numbers. They can't really, I haven't really heard an explanation towards, but the statistics point to the results, almost to the outcomes, with the higher numbers in both skewed one way and the exact opposite way in the other.
And like, how much of that do you think is like actually like those like archetypes that like we've had ingrained into our society for probably almost close to a millennia at this point?
But there's also some truth to it, because how often do you hear about a guy may try to deal with his feelings and express his feelings to just turn around and have it used as a weapon later?
Oh, it happens all the time.
Exactly. So why, as a guy, am I going to go somewhere to talk about feelings and deal with these things if I know that someone's going to use it as a weapon at a later date from experience?
That is where you introduce the concept of safe space. You know, the people that I share my emotions with are my wife. I share them with like a very select group of friends and my therapist. Like that's it. Like I'm very, very careful about who I open up around because of that exact reason.
So that would explain both sides of the numbers on the getting help versus suicide.
I mean, there's a lot of factors. I mean,
There's
you
a
also
lot
have
of
to.
factors, but that is a very high influence in it.
That is, as you're not wrong, but like you also, I would also have to say that like you would also have to take into consideration things for like people's financial situations, not having the insurance to afford it, because unfortunately here in America, like mental health treatment is a luxury and it shouldn't be, but it is. And so sometimes you have things that go untreated and unnoticed because of those factors as well.
You most medical in America is a luxury.
Yeah. Anyways, Smile. I I also want to like point out that this movie had one of the best marketing campaigns
It did. Are you
ever.
talking about the random people planted in crowds that would stand up in front of cameras at like baseball games and just stand there and stare and smile behind reporters and stuff?
Yes. Caitlin, do you know about the marketing campaign for this movie?
I do. Yeah, I've seen some of it when it was happening. It was pretty good.
Is just very sort of like I really wish that like movies would like think outside the box when it comes to how you market your film, because this was like I said, this was probably one of the best marketing campaigns that we've seen in the last 10 years. And it was something so simple, just to hire random people literally to smile very sinisterly in public places. Simple,
Yeah,
effective.
most of the pictures I saw from it and little clips were at like baseball games and hockey games and stuff.
Yeah, that part's a little bit weird because yet I don't really think about like the world of like sports and like horror movies like crossing over a whole lot. Like I know friends that like have that love sport, like love things like hockey, soccer, football, baseball, and love horror movies, but it's just such a an interesting thing because like like the World Series was going on, I think, or like the playoffs to go into the World Series at the time. So I remember there was like a lot of like clips of that stuff that would just be there like out there like that.
Yeah, it was some interesting places that they were turning up. But
I
I'm
guess
really
to be
good.
fair, it's kind of like a free ad at the Super Bowl, but without spending millions of dollars to do it. If you're placing people for whatever you're paying them to be at these high profile events, you're paying them a few $100 or whatever it is, instead of a commercial during that event that's happening. It's a lot cheaper. So pretty
And
smart.
it like and at the age of like social media, it also like went viral. Like this movie and Mark's favorite movie of the year, Megan, went
Oh,
absolutely bananas, thanks to things like TikTok and Instagram. Like, I mean, they really, really like kind of took up the way that you market a horror movie.
Megan was horrible. Why do you have to keep bringing that up? I hated that movie with a passion.
uh,
Yeah, I
there are
actually just
two.
watched that recently for the first time. I hadn't seen it till maybe like a few weeks ago. I finally watched it at a friend's house.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's something that probably seemed good on paper, but when they actually did it, yeah, it just didn't come out very well. But could have been cool, I think, in my opinion. But
I don't understand how that movie has gotten so much. Oh, it's great. It's
Look,
awesome.
it's a fun movie. Is it a great movie? No. Is it a
But
fun movie? Yes.
is it really? Really?
We have established on here that we have completely different tastes in movies sometimes.
Hey, look, you liked 28 Days Later.
I did. And you liked Frankenhooker, so I think we're even.
Not really, because Frankenhooker would fall from my timeline more so than yours.
Yeah, but I was the one that introduced you to that, and that's a win for me. That doesn't happen very often.
I know, not often.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
no, I think
Ah,
we pretty much touched on the heavy topics of the movie, which was kind of my plan, because I feel like if I'm going into an interview that's about something specific, like mental health or something like that, I feel like I want to like touch the most important parts of it. And that's kind of why I brought this movie to the interview. And I feel like we did that. So
Yeah, I feel like this movie is like a great example. It's like it's a really rich representation of not only I feel like it's of the mental health like community where you have like half the side to where it's we're gonna medicate you and get you out the door and hope for the best, and then you have the other half that like actually genuinely cares. And I think the last thing to like talk about is like honestly just the importance of like simply listening. I think sometimes like people we underestimate like how hard it is for just people like just wanting to be heard, like bottom line. And just kind of listening because that is literally the only thing that Rose wants this entire movie. And I mean she eventually finds it in Joel, but like that's the one thing that she wants is to just be heard and validated and helped.
yeah. I mean, I get that. Still doesn't. From the mental health aspect, everything works. From a movie aspect,
Mark, you can tell us how you really feel now.
Yeah.
All right.
Get off my lawn.
Get off my lawn. Exactly. All right. Well, you guys can catch our Artuja along with four other great bands that you guys will be hearing from in the coming weeks. Our benefit show, Monster Mosh for Mental Health. Tickets are now on sale. Now they are in the show notes below, wherever you guys are listening to that. But Caitlin, where can people find Artuja online?
Pretty much everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, bands in town. Pretty much anything you follow, just look us up. We're probably on there. We do have a new single coming out September 1st. We actually should have a music video coming out not too long after that as well. Which is good timing because this song, it's titled "It's Okay," so it falls right into everything we're talking about today. That's why I wish David was actually here, because he's the vocalist, guitarist. He wrote the lyrics and I guess is the face of this song, so to speak. It's what came from him personally. So I wish he could probably explain it a little more. But long story short, it fits right into everything we're talking about today. So it's pretty cool.
So my last question, I forgot to ask this originally during before the break is where does the name Artuja come from? Because I've never quite heard anything like that. Does it have like a meaning, or like what's the origin there?
It's super simple, actually. It's also something David came up with a long time ago when we were actually teenagers. So I think he mainly just took the word art and musician and put them together. And that's kind of falls into the band and everything we try to do now. It's not really just playing music, it's also an art form and an expression. You're visually seeing what you're hearing as well, and that's what we're trying to incorporate, just the whole package. So
All right. I was like, I knew that was a question that I had to ask tonight because I was so
Mhm.
curious about that name. So distinct. But great. We'll provide links in the show notes below. Mark, where can people find you online?
Doing nerdy painting stuff on Titanium Juggernaut Painting on Instagram.
Nice.
Make sure you guys go follow him for all that stuff because he's finally updating it. It's his stuff's amazing. So go support Mark.
I got a
And
handful of
RT
stuff I'm working on right now that I gotta, when I finish them, I'll have to get some of these pictures up for what I'm working on.
do it. And you guys can follow me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can find me talking Nicolas Cage on my other podcast, That's High Praise. And you guys can find us, Abyss Gazing, wherever you guys get your podcast from. You guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, and of course, wherever you guys get your podcast from. Well, Caleb teased this, what we're leaving you guys with. This song is the brand new single from Artuja. This is called It's Okay. And until next time, remember, the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.